Good evening. We'll call this public hearing to order, and if we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Silvas, Commissioner Diana,
Here?
Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Green,
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Thank you.
We do have a quorum. So the public hearing, the purpose of this public hearing is to provide an opportunity for the public to provide input and comments regarding the proposed City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium Annual Action Plan Amendment for fiscal year 2020-21. This amendment includes the Home American Rescue Plan Allocation Plan. Notice of this public hearing was faxed and/or emailed to the media, emailed to various social service agencies and citizens, and/or placed on the City of Urbana's website on June 30th, 2022, and the July 5th, 2022 edition of the News Gazette. This allocation plan identifies preferences to serve homeless or near homeless individuals, as well as presents the proposed budget of $2,970,773. Eligible activities are supportive services, acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, tenant-based rental assistance, development of affordable rental housing, nonprofit operating, nonprofit capacity building, and the administration and planning. I now declare this public hearing open. If anyone desires to express their views regarding the proposed amendment to the fiscal year 2020-21 Annual Action Plan, please come forward and be recognized. Your written comments are also welcome. Would anyone care to come forward? Thank you. Seeing that there are no further comments, I now declare the public hearing closed. And we will now begin the regular Community Development Commission meeting and call the meeting to order, and would request a roll call, please.
Commissioner Silvas, Commissioner Diana,
Here?
Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Green,
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Thank you.
We do have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. If you have had a chance to go through those in your handout for this meeting, I would entertain a motion for their approval.
I move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding the minutes? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. Are there any additions to the agenda?
No.
Thank you. This now brings us to the public input portion of this meeting. If there is anyone who does have any input that they wish to share regarding any items on tonight's agenda, now would be the time to do so if you wish to step forward. Seeing none, we shall move forward to the presentations, which is the staff report.
Thank you. So just a quick staff report tonight. The city's fiscal year 2022-2023 annual action plan, which guides out the city's community development block grant and home investment partnership programs was submitted to HUD back, I believe, early July. So we're now just waiting on HUD to approve that, and that once we get that approval, we will be able to move forward with our fiscal year 2022-2023 programming. Also, the 2022-2023 Youth Services Grant Awards have been made, and those agreements have been executed. So back in May, we brought those to you all for approval. So there's some really great programs going on in the community, and we're excited to be supporting a number of agencies that work with youth in Urbana. So those programs have been executed, and those will run from July 1, 2022 through June 30th of 2023. The other thing that I'll add to the staff report, staff will be making a minor procedural change to the city's housing rehabilitation program guide. It's a small change. Previously in our program guidelines, we stated that rehabilitation assistance could not be offered to units of 5 or more. So like apartment buildings or things like that. But based on reviewing HUD's guidelines and other regulation, we decided that that could be changed, and that our accessibility assistance and also emergency repair assistance under certain circumstances can be supplied to multifamily units. So again, that's a minor procedural change. It doesn't need to be voted on. We just wanted to let you all know about that, so that'll help expand assistance in the community. So that's all I have for the staff report, but I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Just one question on that modification to the rehab guidelines. Is there an upper limit on those, or are we including all multifamily?
There's no upper limit. We do, though, throughout the application process, need to verify that the resident that receiving assistance is low income, and so we are still abiding by that statute. But previously, we limited it to single family dwellings.
Right.
So this will just expand that.
Okay. So we're going to use the same as the county guidelines then. Single family normally being 2 or 4 units.
Yes. Yeah.
So now we're just going to the multifamily.
Yes.
So it's pretty much any residential unit.
Correct.
At this point. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you. I don't believe that we have any unfinished business, do we?
No, we do not.
Okay. So that will bring us to new business, which is the fiscal year 2020-2021 Annual Action Plan Amendment with the Home ARP Allocation Plan. That I believe you're going to present, Sheila?
Yep, JD and I will.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Please identify yourselves, too, before you get started.
Hi, I'm JD McClanahan, and I am a planner at Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, and we contracted with the Home Consortium to work on developing this Home ARP allocation plan for this funding. So I'll be kind of presenting a quick summary of the allocation plan itself. So the first slide here is just a quick list of the sections of the allocation plan that are provided, some of which the content I've already presented to this body when the allocation plan was kind of in process in the spring, and some of which will be new content that we'll talk through today. So some parts of the process that I have already presented to the Community Development Commission include the consultation portion, in which I either interviewed or sent out a survey to 22 different organizations in the community working in the areas of homelessness and housing, all kind of within the 7 categories that you can see there that HUD laid out that were kind of required categories for outreach for this process. In addition to the consultation, we created a public survey that was made available from late April through the end of May that received 128 total responses just of community members providing feedback on how they would like to see this funding spent and what they identified as issues related to this funding in the community. Based on that consultation and public feedback, as well as the data on existing conditions that we were able to gather, there were several kind of priority needs that were identified for this funding. The first was shelter facilities that are low barrier, 24/7, and open to a variety of different household structures and identities. In addition, supportive services to help those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness or in other vulnerable categories, to help them kind of address the individual life circumstances and help kind of create a personalized way for them to build and maintain stability. And then finally, increased access to affordable housing that's not only affordable, but it's also quality, safe, accessible, and stable for households. Based on those priority areas, the following budget for this, the recommended budget for this HOMARP funding was created. And we will talk through kind of each of the individual programming types in the subsequent slides, but you can see at the bottom that this does total up to the entire $2.97 million allocation that the Urbana Home Consortium was provided.
These categories were the ones identified by HUD that we
Yes.
needed to put the budget towards.
Yes. So the first HUD identified category is supportive services, and in the draft allocation plan, we are proposing $1 million go towards supportive services. This is a broad category that includes everything from childcare and transportation to counseling, including case management, mental health counseling, legal services, as well as some financial assistance. So that can include credit repair, that could be short-term or medium-term financial assistance for rent for HOMARP qualifying households. The next HUD identified spending category is non-congregate shelter, which the draft allocation plan is proposing $400,000 go toward. This non-congregate shelter is homeless shelters that include private units or rooms as temporary shelter. So it is a homeless shelter. There's no lease or occupancy agreement required, but it is kind of private facilities. So these funds can be used either to construct new facilities or to acquire and rehabilitate existing facilities. For example, converting a motel into a non-congregate homeless shelter. The next HUD designated category is tenant-based rental assistance. So this is basically rental vouchers that would go towards households. The draft allocation plan is proposing that we not allocate any HOMARP funds towards this purpose, and that will be the reason for choosing not to allocate funds toward this purpose will be discussed in a few more slides in more detail. And then the final kind of programming category that HUD lays out was affordable housing, for which the draft allocation plan is proposing $1 million. So this is funding to either acquire and rehabilitate existing facilities or construct new facilities for affordable rental housing, where 70% of the funded units are used must be used for HOMARP qualified populations. The guidance mentions that these units can be things like manufactured housing, single room occupancy, and permanent supportive housing, but can also just be kind of standard single family or apartment buildings. And then these funds can be used for the construction process and can also be used for ongoing operating costs to operate this affordable rental housing. So in addition to those kind of four primary programming areas, there's also a few kind of administration and operating cost categories. So the first is nonprofit operating costs, which we're proposing a little more than $148,000 go to. This is kind of operating costs for organizations that will be providing this HOMARP programming and using the funds for the kind of categories that we listed previously. So this is just kind of the cost for organizations providing that programming to continue to operate successfully. So that can be salaries and wages or facilities costs like rent, rent, equipment, materials, so different kind of just ongoing operational costs for organizations that receive home art funds.
And this, it looks like a funny number, but this is the maximum that HUD will allow us to fund for this category and the next one.
Yes. So the next category is similar for nonprofits that are providing this programming. This is capacity building funds, which again we're providing a little more than $148,000 towards. So this would be costs to kind of provide increased capacity for these organizations so that they can best administer and best provide the home art programming. So that could be things like salaries for new hires that are brought on to provide this programming, training, development, upgraded equipment, or technical assistance or consultation costs to really help the organization administer home art programs effectively. And then the final spending category is administration and planning, for which almost $274,000 are allocated. This is basically all the costs to administer the actual home art grant itself. So that includes the costs to create this allocation plan that we're talking about today, the costs for creating RFPs or administering that process, and kind of continual monitoring of any organizations that receive this funding. So this is the cost for kind of management of the actual home art funds themselves. So we wanted to provide a quick a few points, just talking through why we decided on the allocations that we presented. The first point to talk through is just the value from investing in facilities and supportive services that will allow us to better address underlying issues. So investing in facilities for shelter and for housing, and then investing in supportive services allows us to serve the distinct needs of the varied populations that will be eligible for and receiving this funding, and allows us to kind of continue to build on existing service infrastructure and build on that and complement that as we administer these funds. The increased flexibility of the home art program was also an important factor in these allocations. There's eligible spending categories for this funding that don't apply to the annual home allocation that the Home Consortium receives. So things like non-congregate shelter and supportive services that we wouldn't be able to just normally spend home funds on. We want to be able to take advantage of this opportunity to fund those services with these funds. In addition to that, I mentioned that we would talk through kind of deciding not to allocate funds towards TBRA in this funding from the home art funds. A theme that kind of came up frequently in the stakeholder consultation process was obstacles to rental assistance usage, including kind of the inadequate, low quality units in the kind of existing private market rental categories that low income renters are applying for, as well as the reluctance of many landlords to rent to rental assistance holders. So those factors do limit the effectiveness of this assistance. And as kind of I mentioned in the previous point, we wanted to prioritize funding categories that we do not usually get the opportunity to. TBRA is a funding category that normal home funds can be used for. So if that's identified as a priority, then kind of the annual home funding allocation can go towards that. And finally, as I mentioned, the supportive services.
Sorry.
No problem. The supportive services spending category is a kind of broad category that includes short and medium term rental assistance. So that's categorized as under 2 years, as well as kind of move-in assistance, landlord, tenant, kind of mediation and outreach. So many of the concerns that were brought up in the public feedback about kind of providing rental assistance can still be provided under the banner of supportive services as well. So following all that discussion of the actual kind of programming and fund allocation, the next thing that we wanted to talk about was the recommended preferences for the client base for this funding. The recommendation of the Home Consortium is that households belonging to the homeless and at risk of homelessness qualified populations will receive priority for any programs that are HomeARP funded. Providing this preference will allow for for services to these groups to be provided effectively in a timely manner and address the needs of these groups. So address the significant needs of homeless populations and intervene for those at risk of homelessness before they enter into a period of actual homelessness. So this provides an opportunity to kind of act decisively and quickly for these groups. How this would kind of actually play out in the HomeARP program administration process is that each funded HomeARP program would have its own specific application process for that program. These applications would be accepted on a first-come, first-served basis for qualified applicants, with the exception that the two preference populations, which are homeless and at risk of homelessness populations, would be moved to the top of the applicant list. Using this way of administering the programs and the applicants allows us to make sure that that all programs are fully in compliance with HomeARP regulations and able to serve all of the populations that HomeARP is geared toward and are eligible for HomeARP. So that would make sure that any kind of existing application or referral processes that we have that have different qualification criteria, we're not relying on those. We're making sure that everyone who qualifies for HomeARP is able to apply for these programs. So that is a quick summary of the content of the allocation plan. Before we move on to questions, I just wanted to provide a quick reminder of the calendar and the process that we are in. So currently, at the end of July, we're in the middle of the public hearing process and presenting the draft plan to the public. The plan is that in the month of August, we will take any feedback or any revisions that are needed for this plan and create them, and then implement them and create the final allocation plan, which we will submit to HUD in the month of August. And then within 45 days of our submission to HUD, they're required to either provide authorization for us to allocate funds or provide instructions on any further revisions that are needed for us to be fully compliant and have access to these funds. So that's just a quick summary of kind of the process moving forward. So that's everything that I have. So I'm happy to open it up to questions or open it up for Sheila if she has anything else.
So in your packet, we included a memo that kind of covered all of this, as well as the resolution that we are requesting that you submit to council with either a recommendation for approval of the allocation plan, forward to city council with recommended changes, or do not approve and will forfeit the federal funding. And so we recommend that you forward the resolution to council with a recommendation for approval.
I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So you said I think on the last slide that that each program will have its own application process.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say each program, do you mean the 4 categories of supportive services, non-congregate shelters, or do you mean the 25 or 30 things underneath those?
What will happen once HUD approves it, we will issue a request for proposal to meet the funding categories that have already been outlined, and then depending upon what we get in, whether it's for shelter or whether it's for a specific program, those will be based on first come, first serve, with the priority being given to those that are homeless or near homeless. And
So
those
that's the
requests-
applications of the people who are going to benefit.
We'll let the agencies do that, but we're going to
Oh,
solicit request proposal from agencies.
Gotcha, okay.
And those proposals will be brought to you for approval and council.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Did you have more questions, or was that it?
No, that kind of answered both of them, because I was curious about how many programs would have an RFP and so
Yeah, it
not.
doesn't-
So I see that.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I did have a couple of questions too. On the supportive services, and since we are into a number of things that we wouldn't normally be funding there, is the qualification for that going to run along the same guidelines? I mean, are we using the kind of home ARP qualified type of approach for that? So, for instance, I guess I should give an example. If somebody was looking for mental health services, would they also have to be qualified under the overall program?
Yeah, I think this kind of ties in with the previous question.
Right.
And yeah, my understanding is that in order to make sure that the program is open to all home ARP qualified populations, that they probably would have a distinct application for that. Sheila, I don't know if you,
No,
that was your understanding as well.
Right, that's correct. So if an agency comes to us, mental health center comes to us and says, we're going to offer this program to address the needs of homeless or near homeless, their application would have to show how their application will have to show how they're meeting that, but then we will request that information as part of our monitoring too. So,
Okay. I guess my second question, which is kind of along the lines of the same thing, the preferential aspect of that. So if we have different agencies which we have approved who are running a plan, if one is opened up to applications, then I'm going to assume that there's going to have to be is there going to be a window for those applications?
it's usually
I mean-
till the funding runs out. So, you know,
But if it's till the funding, excuse me for interrupting, but if it's till the funding runs out, that's contrary to having preferential classes in there. Then it does not, then it is truly just first come, first serve, unless there is an overabundance of applications. But if we're running it as the funding goes, you follow what I mean, the homeless and near homeless could be later in making applications and be out of funds. So that's why I'm wondering how that works.
yeah, and we will flush that out during the request for proposal process, you know, to tie in how we want that, or maybe we ask the agency to identify how you're going to make this a priority. I want to be careful not to put too many of, beyond what HUD is requiring,
Right.
regulations on it, because I think these agencies are really used to doing this process, and I would want to have their input.
Yeah, you don't want to slow the process
No.
down either, but if there's
No.
going to be preferred classes, you want to make sure that they're
Right.
serviced, obviously.
Right.
Okay.
But then, you know, it could be the reverse. It may be that nobody that's homeless or near homeless request, you know, assistance, and so then we still want to spend the money, you know, so you got to find a balance there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, as Sheila had mentioned, we have 3 options available to us. We can move to forward the resolution to City Council with a recommendation for approval. We can forward the resolution to City Council with recommended changes, or we can not approve the resolution and forfeit the federal funding is our recommendation. So, Chair is open to a motion. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion is carried. And we will send it to City Council with a recommendation for approval. Thank you very much for doing all the work to present that. It gave a good picture. With the conclusion of that, seeing no other business before the commission, I would declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.